I never believed in miracles until I watched my daughter play piano in a thunderstorm while tears streamed down her face, and a stranger worth billions knocked on our door at 2 a.m. My name is Rebecca Chen, and this is the story of how the worst night of our lives became the beginning of everything we never dared to dream. You need to understand something about my daughter Celeste. At 16, she could make a piano weep with joy or break your heart with a single note. She'd been playing since she was 5 years old, ever since my mother May first placed her tiny fingers on those keys. But Celeste had one problem that threatened to destroy everything she'd worked for. She couldn't perform in front of people. The moment anyone watched her play, her hands would shake, her breathing would stop, and the music would die. I'm Rebecca Chen, a single mom working double shifts as a nurse at Seattle General Hospital. Every day I watch people fight for their lives, but nothing prepared me for watching my own daughter's dreams slowly suffocate under the weight of our reality. We lived in a cramped apartment above Wong's Chinese restaurant in the International District, where the smell of garlic and ginger mixed with the sound of Celeste's piano practice every single day. The man who would change everything was Theodore Whitman, though we didn't know his name that night. What we later learned was that he was worth $4.2 billion, the founder of Harmony Technologies, and he was driving through our neighborhood in the middle of a thunderstorm because he couldn't sleep. He couldn't sleep because 6 months earlier his own daughter Isabella had died in a car accident. Isabella had been 18, a piano prodigy just like Celeste, and she'd been preparing for her freshman year at Juilliard when her life was cut short. That night, as rain hammered against our windows and lightning split the Seattle sky, Celeste sat at my mother's old upright piano in our dark living room. She wasn't practicing for a recital or working on technique. She was crying, and she was playing like her life depended on it, because in her mind, it did. Earlier that evening, we'd received the call that destroyed everything. Her scholarship to Juilliard had fallen through. After years of dreaming, saving, and sacrificing, we were 48 hours away from the deadline and $70,000 short of her first year's tuition. The sound of her playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, my mother's favorite piece, filled our small apartment and somehow carried through the storm. 3 blocks away, Theodore Whitman heard it through his car window, and something inside him broke open. He told me later that he'd been planning to drive his car off the Aurora Bridge that night, but the music stopped him cold. He followed the sound like a man possessed, because it reminded him of Isabella's playing, and for the first time in 6 months, he felt his daughter's presence again. What you're about to hear isn't just a story about money or music or even miracles. It's about how sometimes our deepest pain becomes someone else's salvation, and how a 16-year-old girl playing piano in a thunderstorm saved 3 lives that night, including her own. It's about how my mother May, who died 2 years ago, somehow reached across heaven to bring a broken billionaire to our door at the exact moment we needed him most. This is the story of how Celeste went from crying at a piano in the dark to performing at Carnegie Hall, how I learned that accepting help isn't weakness, and how a man who'd lost everything found his reason to live again. But it all started with that storm, those tears, and the most beautiful music I've ever heard in my life. Let me tell you about my daughter Celeste, because understanding her means understanding why that storm night changed everything. When Celeste was 5 years old, she climbed onto the bench of my mother's upright piano and played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star perfectly after hearing it just once. Not the melody, the entire arrangement, harmonies included. My mother May dropped her teacup that day and whispered in Mandarin, "This child has music in her soul." For 11 years, Grandma May taught Celeste everything she knew. Every day after school, Celeste would run up those narrow stairs to our apartment, grab a snack, and sit at that piano for 3 hours straight. She learned Chopin, Bach, Debussy, and dozens of traditional Chinese pieces that my mother had carried with her from Beijing 50 years ago. By age 14, Celeste could play concert-level repertoire that would challenge most adults. But here's what broke my heart. The moment anyone else entered the room while she played, Celeste would freeze. Her hands would start trembling, her breathing would become shallow, and the music would just stop. She could pour her entire soul into those keys when she thought no one was listening, but put her in front of even one person, and the gift that defined her would disappear. We lived in a 600-square-foot apartment above Wong's Chinese restaurant on South King Street. The walls were thin, the neighbors were loud, and every morning I woke up to the smell of someone else's cooking mixing with the sound of traffic from the interstate. I worked 12-hour shifts at Seattle General Hospital as a registered nurse, and on weekends I picked up extra shifts in the emergency room. Even with overtime, we barely scraped together enough for rent, groceries, and Celeste's sheet music. The piano was the only beautiful thing we owned. It had been my mother's pride and joy, a 1987 Yamaha upright that she'd saved for 3 years to buy. After she passed away 2 years ago from lung cancer, that piano became Celeste's sanctuary, and my daily reminder of everything I couldn't give my daughter. Every time I looked at it, I saw dollar signs. $70,000 for 1 year at Juilliard. $70,000 I didn't have and couldn't borrow. When Celeste's acceptance letter arrived from Juilliard 3 months earlier, we both cried for an hour. She'd auditioned by sending a recording, which was the only way her stage fright would allow her to apply. The admissions board called her technique exceptional and her musicality profound. For exactly 2 weeks we lived in a bubble of pure joy, planning her future, researching dorms, imagining her performing at Lincoln Center. Then reality hit like a sledgehammer. The partial scholarship she'd been promised got redistributed to another student whose family had political connections. Financial aid offered us loans that would bury us in debt for the next 30 years. I applied for personal loans from every bank in Seattle and got rejected by all of them. My credit wasn't terrible, but it wasn't good enough for the kind of money we needed. I started working 16-hour days, taking on every extra shift the hospital would give me. I sold my car and took the bus to work. I canceled our cable, switched to the cheapest phone plan, and started buying generic everything at the grocery store. Celeste noticed. Of course she noticed. And the guilt was eating her alive. 3 weeks before that storm night, I found Celeste researching community colleges on the library computer. When I asked her about it, she looked at me with those serious brown eyes and said, "Mom, maybe we should be realistic about this. Maybe Juilliard was never really possible for someone like us. Someone like us." Those words hit me harder than any physical pain I'd ever felt. My daughter, this incredible talent who could make grown men cry with her music, thought she wasn't good enough because we were poor. I wanted to tell her that talent doesn't care about your bank account, that dreams don't discriminate based on your zip code. But the truth was crushing both of us. Our conversations became shorter, more careful. We started avoiding eye contact at dinner. Celeste practiced less, and when she did play, the music sounded different, sadder, like she was already saying goodbye to something she'd never really had. I would lie in bed listening to her play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 and feel like the worst mother in the world because I couldn't make her dreams come true. The deadline was July 15th. 48 hours to come up with $70,000 or watch my daughter's future disappear. That's when I made the decision that would lead to the biggest fight we'd ever had. I decided to sell my mother's jewelry, the only valuable things she'd left us, without telling Celeste first. I thought I was being practical. I thought I was being strong. I had no idea I was about to break both our hearts. July 13th, 2 days before the Juilliard deadline, I made what I thought was a practical decision. While Celeste was at the library, I gathered my mother's jewelry from the small wooden box she'd left me and drove to 3 different pawn shops in Pioneer Square. The jade bracelet my father had given her for their wedding anniversary. The gold necklace with the tiny dragon pendant she'd worn every Sunday to church. The pearl earrings she'd saved for special occasions that never seemed special enough. The pawn shop owner, a weathered man with kind eyes, examined each piece carefully and offered me $3,200. $3,200 for my mother's entire life's worth of beautiful things. It wasn't even 5% of what we needed, but I took it anyway, because what choice did I have? At least it was something. At least I was trying. I should have told Celeste what I was doing. I should have explained that selling those pieces felt like losing my mother all over again, but that I'd rather lose her memory than watch Celeste's future die. Instead, I hid the money in an envelope under my mattress and prayed I'd figure out the other $67,000 before she found out. But Celeste did find out. She came home from the library earlier than expected and found me crying at the kitchen table, holding the empty jewelry box. The look on her face when she realized what I'd done was pure devastation mixed with rage. The confrontation. "You sold Grandma May's jewelry?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through me like glass. I tried to explain, tried to tell her it was just temporary, that maybe we could buy the pieces back someday. But she wasn't listening. She was staring at the empty box like I'd just murdered someone she loved. "Those weren't yours to sell," she said, her voice getting stronger, angrier. "Those were Grandma's. She left them to both of us, not just you. Celeste, I'm trying to save your future here. I'm trying to get you to Juilliard." With blood money? With the last pieces of Grandma May we had left? She started pacing around our tiny living room, her hands clenched into fists. "Do you think she would have wanted this? Do you think she would have wanted you to destroy her memory just so I could go to some fancy school?" The words that came out of my mouth next were the worst I've ever spoken to my daughter. "Your grandmother is dead, Celeste. Dead people don't want anything. But you're alive, and you have a gift, and I'll be damned if I let it die because we don't have enough money." She stopped pacing and stared at me like I'd slapped her. "Don't you dare use Grandma's death to justify this. She wouldn't recognize the person you've become, working yourself to death, selling everything that matters, turning into someone who thinks money is more important than family." That's when I lost it completely. All the exhaustion, all the fear, all the desperate love I had for her came pouring out in the ugliest way possible. "You think I want to work 16-hour shifts? You think I enjoy having no life, no friends, no future of my own? I'm destroying myself for you, Celeste. Every single day I'm getting older and more tired and more broken, all so you can have something I never had, and you stand there judging me for trying to make it happen. I never asked you to sacrifice everything for me." She shouted back, tears streaming down her face. "I never asked you to sell Grandma's jewelry or work yourself to death or make me feel guilty every single day for having a dream I can't afford. Then maybe you should find a different dream." The words were out before I could stop them. "Maybe you should be realistic about what kind of life people like us get to have." The silence that followed was deafening. Celeste looked at me like I just killed something precious between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was deadly quiet. "Grandma May always said that music was the language of the soul. She said it was bigger than money, bigger than fear, bigger than anything that could try to stop it. But you don't believe that anymore, do you? You think everything beautiful has a price tag. I think everything beautiful requires money to survive." I shot back, "And we don't have any. Then I guess we don't deserve anything beautiful." She turned toward her bedroom, then stopped and looked back at me one last time. "You know what the worst part is, Mom? I was ready to give up Juilliard for you. I was ready to stay here and go to community college and get some practical degree. That would help pay the bills. But you couldn't even let me make that sacrifice with dignity. You had to sell Grandma's soul first." She slammed her bedroom door so hard that the pictures on the wall rattled. I stood there in our tiny kitchen, surrounded by the smell of other people's dinner and the sound of traffic outside, feeling like the worst mother who'd ever lived. Outside, the first drops of rain started hitting our windows. By 8 o'clock that night, the storm was getting serious. Thunder rolled across Seattle like a freight train, and lightning lit up our apartment in sharp, white flashes. The power had been flickering on and off for an hour, and I knew it was only a matter of time before we lost it completely. Celeste hadn't come out of her room since our fight. I'd knocked on her door twice, trying to apologize, trying to explain, but she wouldn't answer. I could hear her moving around in there, but she wouldn't talk to me. The silence between us felt heavier than the storm clouds gathering outside. At 11:30 p.m., the power finally went out. Our apartment plunged into darkness, lit only by the occasional flash of lightning. I heard Celeste's door open, heard her bare feet padding across the living room floor. I thought maybe she was coming to find me, to talk things through, but instead I heard the piano bench creak as she sat down. Then she started playing. In the pitch-black living room, with rain hammering against the windows and thunder shaking the building, my daughter began playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Grandma May's favorite piece. The same piece my mother had played for Celeste every night as a lullaby when she was small. But this wasn't the gentle, loving version I remembered. This was raw and desperate and full of pain. Every note seemed to carry the weight of our fight, the pressure of the deadline, the grief of losing. Her grandmother all over again. She played like she was pouring her heart out through her fingertips, like the piano was the only thing in the world that could understand her. I sat on my bed in the dark, listening to her play, and realized that I'd been so focused on saving her future that I'd forgotten about her present. She wasn't just a talent to be preserved or a dream to be funded. She was my daughter, and she was breaking apart right in front of me, and all I'd done was add to the pressure that was crushing her. The storm outside grew more violent, but Celeste kept playing. She moved from Chopin to Rachmaninoff to a traditional Chinese piece my mother had taught her years ago. Each song seemed to tell part of her story, and I understood that this wasn't practice or performance. This was goodbye. She was saying farewell to the piano, to the music, to the dream that was about to die in 48 hours. 3 blocks away, though none of us knew it yet, Theodore Whitman was driving through the storm in his black Mercedes, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything except his daughter Isabella. He'd been planning to end his own pain that night, but something made him roll down his window as he drove past our building. Something made him stop the car and listen to the most beautiful, heartbroken music he'd ever heard in his life. By 1:30 a.m., Celeste had been playing for over 2 hours straight. The storm outside wasn't letting up, and neither was she. I could hear her transitioning from piece to piece without stopping, her fingers moving across the keys like she was having a conversation with someone I couldn't see. Maybe she was talking to Grandma May. Maybe she was talking to herself. Maybe she was just letting the music say everything our fight had left unsaid. Then something changed in her playing. The desperation softened into something else. Something that sounded like acceptance. She began playing a piece I hadn't heard in years, a simple Chinese lullaby my mother used to sing called Mo Li Hua, which means jasmine flower. It was the first song Grandma May had ever taught her, back when her 5-year-old fingers could barely reach an octave. As she played, I realized what she was doing. This wasn't just practice or emotional release anymore. She was saying goodbye. Every song was a farewell to a different part of her musical life, and this lullaby was her final goodbye to the little girl who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. I wanted to run out there and stop her, wanted to tell her that we'd figure something out, that giving up wasn't the answer. But the truth was, I didn't know how to figure anything out. We had 36 hours left and $67,000 to find, and I'd already sacrificed everything I could think of to sacrifice. At 2:15 a.m., just as Celeste was finishing the lullaby, I heard a car door slam outside. In our neighborhood, that usually meant trouble. Drug deals, domestic fights, someone getting evicted in the middle of the night. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a black Mercedes parked directly in front of our building, its hazard lights blinking through the rain. A man stepped out of the car. He was tall, probably in his late 50s, wearing an expensive-looking coat that was getting soaked by the storm. He didn't run for cover like most people would. Instead, he stood there on the sidewalk, his face turned up toward our apartment, listening. Just listening to Celeste play. For a moment I thought he might be some kind of criminal, someone casing our building or planning to break in. But there was something about the way he stood there, completely still in the pouring rain, that made me think otherwise. He looked like a man who'd lost something important and was hearing an echo of it in my daughter's music. He walked slowly toward our building's entrance, not like someone who was trying to sneak around, but like someone who was being drawn by something he couldn't resist. I heard the downstairs door open, heard footsteps on the stairs leading up to our apartment. My heart started pounding. The footsteps stopped outside our door. For maybe 30 seconds, there was nothing but the sound of Celeste playing and rain hitting the windows. Then came 3 soft knocks, so gentle they were almost lost in the storm. I froze. It was 2:30 in the morning. Who knocks on someone's door at 2:30 a.m. with good intentions? I stayed perfectly still, hoping whoever it was would give up and go away. But then Celeste stopped playing. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the knocking. 3 more knocks, still soft, still patient. Then a voice called through the door, and it wasn't at all what I'd expected. It was cultured, educated, and it sounded like it belonged to someone who was used to being listened to. "Please," the voice said, "I don't mean any harm. I just need to know who's playing. That music, it's beautiful, and I haven't heard anything that beautiful in a very long time." I crept to the front door and looked through the peephole. The man was standing there dripping wet, his hands at his sides, making no attempt to hide from my view. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. More than that, he looked broken in a way that I recognized, because I'd seen the same expression in my own mirror lately. "I know how this looks," he continued, his voice carrying clearly through the door. "I know it's late and I'm a stranger, and you have every right to call the police. But that music stopped me from making the biggest mistake of my life tonight. Please, I just need to thank whoever was playing." There was something in his voice that made me believe him. Maybe it was the way he said please like he was asking for a lifeline. Maybe it was the fact that he wasn't trying to force his way in or making demands. Maybe it was just that I was so emotionally drained from our fight that I couldn't process normal fear the way I usually would. I kept the chain lock engaged and opened the door just wide enough to see his face clearly. Up close, he looked even more exhausted, but also somehow familiar, like I'd seen him somewhere before but couldn't place where. His eyes were red-rimmed, either from crying or from not sleeping, and when he looked at me, I saw a grief so deep it took my breath away. "My name is Theodore Whitman," he said quietly. "I was driving through the neighborhood and I heard piano music coming from this building. I've been sitting in my car for 20 minutes, just listening. I haven't heard anything that beautiful. Since my daughter died 6 months ago, Theodore Whitman, the name hit me like a physical blow. I knew exactly who he was now. His face had been on the cover of Seattle magazine 3 years ago when his company went public. Forbes had called him one of the most influential tech entrepreneurs on the West Coast. He was worth billions of dollars, and he was standing outside my door at 2:30 in the morning, asking about my daughter's piano playing. She was 18, he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. Isabella. She played piano too. She was supposed to start at Juilliard this fall, but she died in a car accident in January. Tonight I was driving around trying to decide whether to keep living without her, and then I heard your daughter play, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt like Isabella was still somehow alive in the world. Behind me I heard the piano bench creak as Celeste stood up. She'd been listening to every word, and when I turned around, she was standing in the doorway to the living room, her face streaked with tears, wearing the same pajamas she'd had on during our fight hours earlier. "Mom," she said softly, "let him in." Every parental instinct I had screamed against it. He was a stranger. It was the middle of the night, and I was responsible for keeping my daughter safe. But there was something about Theodore Whitman that didn't feel dangerous. He felt like a man who understood exactly what we were going through, who recognized the same kind of desperation in us that we could see in him. "I know this is insane," I said, undoing the chain lock, "but come in, you're getting soaked out." There. He stepped inside our tiny apartment, water dripping from his coat onto our worn carpet. He looked around at our modest living space, at the old piano that dominated our small living room, at the stack of Juilliard brochures on our kitchen table, and something in his expression shifted from grief to understanding. "That's a beautiful instrument," he said, nodding toward the piano. "A Yamaha upright, probably late 80s. Those have incredible tone when they're properly maintained." Celeste moved closer, no longer hiding behind me. "It was my grandmother's," she said. "She taught me everything I know." Theodore looked at her with the kind of attention that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. "What's your name?" "Celeste." "Celeste Chen." "Celeste," he repeated, like he was testing how it sounded. "That's a beautiful name. It means heavenly, doesn't it?" She nodded, and for the first time since our fight, I saw her smile just a little bit. "Well, Celeste," Theodore said, "your playing tonight saved my life. I think it's only fair that I return the favor." Theodore stood in our living room, still dripping from the storm, looking at Celeste with an expression I'd never seen before. It wasn't pity or curiosity or even admiration. It was recognition. Like he was seeing something in her that he'd been searching for without knowing it. "Would you play something for me?" he asked gently. "I know it's late, and I know this whole situation is strange, but I haven't heard live piano music since Isabella's last recital, and your playing tonight brought me back from a very dark place." Celeste looked at me, then back at him, her eyes still red from crying. "I'm not very good at playing for people," she admitted. "I get nervous and my hands shake and the music just disappears." "I understand," Theodore said, settling carefully into our old armchair like he'd been invited to stay for hours instead of minutes. Isabella had stage fright too, especially when she was younger. But sometimes playing for one person who truly understands music is different than performing for a crowd. Sometimes it's like having a conversation. I watched my daughter consider this. She'd been ready to give up piano forever just an hour ago, but something about Theodore's presence was changing her mind. Maybe it was the way he talked about music, like it was a living thing. Maybe it was the gentle authority in his voice that suggested he knew what he was talking about. Maybe it was just that he was the first person in months who'd asked her to play instead of asking her to stop. She sat down at the piano bench and placed her fingers on the keys. I held my breath, waiting for the familiar freeze-up. The trembling hands, the stammered excuse about being too tired or too emotional. Instead, she began playing Debussy's Clair de Lune, and her hands were perfectly steady. The recognition. Theodore closed his eyes as she played, and I watched his face transform. The exhaustion and grief were still there, but something else was happening too. His breathing deepened, his shoulders relaxed, and for the first time since he'd walked through our door, he looked peaceful. When Celeste finished, he opened his eyes, and there were tears streaming down his face. Not polite, careful tears, but the kind of deep, broken sobbing that comes from somewhere you can't control. "That's exactly how Isabella played that piece," he whispered. The same phrasing, the same touch, even the same slight pause before the crescendo in the third section. "It's like she's here in this room." Celeste's eyes widened. "Your daughter played Debussy?" "She played everything. Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Bach, contemporary pieces I'd never heard of. She was supposed to audition for Juilliard last fall, but she never got the chance." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, looking embarrassed by his emotional response. "She died on January 18th. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit her car 3 blocks from our house. She was coming home from piano lessons. The silence that followed was crushing. I wanted to say something, anything, that might ease his pain, but what words exist for that kind of loss? Instead, Celeste spoke. "I'm so sorry," she said simply. "She must have been amazing." "She was. And so are you." Theodore leaned forward in his chair, focusing on Celeste with laser intensity. "I've heard hundreds of pianists over the years. I've sat in concert halls, attended competitions, funded music programs at universities across the country. What you just played wasn't just technically excellent. It was emotionally authentic. You don't just play music, Celeste. You speak through it." That's when his eyes fell on the Juilliard materials scattered across our kitchen table. The acceptance letter, the financial aid documents, the tuition breakdown I'd been staring at for weeks like it might magically change if I looked at it long enough. "Is that a Juilliard acceptance letter?" he asked, standing up and walking over to the table. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "It's complicated," I started to say, but Celeste interrupted me. "I got accepted, but we can't afford it," she said with the blunt honesty that only teenagers can manage. "The scholarship I was promised went to someone else, and we don't have $70,000. The deadline to confirm enrollment is tomorrow, but we're not going to make it." Theodore picked up the acceptance letter and read it carefully. When he looked up, his expression had changed completely. The grief was still there, but it was joined by something else. Purpose. $70,000, he repeated. "That's for the full year?" Tuition, room, board, everything. Just tuition, I said quietly. Room and board is another 25,000. Books, living expenses, it all adds up to about 100,000 total for the first year. He set the letter down gently and looked back and forth between Celeste and me. May I ask you both a very personal question? We nodded. If money wasn't an issue, if you could attend Juilliard without any financial burden on your family, would you want to go, Celeste? More than anything in the world, she whispered. Theodore walked back to the piano and placed his hand gently on the wooden surface, the same way you might touch a gravestone or something else that held sacred meaning. My full name is Theodore. James Whitman, he said. I'm the founder and CEO of Harmony Technologies. 6 months ago, I was worth $4.2 billion. Today, after losing Isabella, that money feels like the most meaningless thing in the world. I've been asking myself what the point of having all that wealth is if I can't use it to keep the things I love alive. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Isabella wanted to establish a music foundation someday. He continued. She wanted to help talented kids who couldn't afford music education. She had this whole plan worked out, scholarships and mentorship programs and summer camps for underprivileged children. She was going to call it Music for Everyone, because she believed that talent doesn't care about your bank account. He turned to face us, and the look in his eyes was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was grief and hope and determination all mixed together. I've been trying to figure out how to honor her memory for 6 months, and tonight, listening to you play in the storm, I finally understand what she would have wanted me to do. The offer. I want to establish the Isabella Whitman Memorial Scholarship, he said, his voice gaining strength with every word. And I want Celeste to be the first recipient. Full tuition, room, board, books, living expenses, everything you need for all 4 years at Juilliard. The world stopped. I mean that literally. The sound of the rain, the rumble of thunder, even my own heartbeat seemed to pause as I tried to process what he'd just said. You're offering to pay for my daughter's entire education? I asked, because I needed to hear it again to believe it. I'm offering to invest in her future, he corrected. But there are conditions. Of course there were conditions. There had to be conditions. Nothing this good ever came without a price. First, Theodore said, looking directly at Celeste, you must promise me that you will never give up on your music, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how discouraged you become. Isabella would have been devastated to know that another talented musician was abandoning their gift because of money. Celeste nodded eagerly. Second, you must agree to perform publicly at least once each semester. I know about your stage fright, and I'm not asking you to get over it immediately. But Isabella struggled with performance anxiety too, and she learned that the only way to overcome fear is to face it gradually, with support. I'll make sure you have the best teachers and counselors to help you. I can do that, Celeste said, though I could hear the nervousness in her voice. Third, during summer breaks, you'll work with the foundation to teach piano to underprivileged children. Music education shouldn't be a luxury that only wealthy families can afford. Isabella believed that, and I believe it too. That sounds amazing, Celeste breathed. Theodore reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card and a pen. On the back of the card, he wrote a phone number and handed it to me. This is my personal number, he said. Call me tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I'll have my lawyers draw up the scholarship paperwork, and we'll wire the money to Juilliard before the deadline. Celeste will start classes in September as planned. I stared at the card in my hand, reading and rereading the number like it might disappear if I looked away. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Billionaires didn't show up at random apartments in thunderstorms and offer to change people's lives. But Theodore Whitman was standing in our living room, soaking wet and tear-stained, looking at my daughter like she was the answer to a prayer he'd been too broken to ask. Why? I managed to ask. Why would you do this for us? You don't even know us. He smiled for the first time since he'd walked through our door, and it transformed his entire face. Because 6 months ago, I lost my daughter and thought my life was over. Tonight I found her again in your daughter's music. Isabella always said that when we help other people achieve their dreams, we keep our own dreams alive too. He looked at Celeste, who was sitting at the piano bench crying silent tears of joy and disbelief. Besides, talent like Celeste's doesn't come along very often. It would be criminal to let it disappear because of something as stupid as money. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to calm. The thunder was moving further away, and the rain was settling into a gentle patter against the windows. Inside our tiny apartment, 3 broken people had somehow found a way to heal each other. "There's one more thing," Theodore said as he prepared to leave. "I'd like to be there for Celeste's first public performance at Juilliard, if that's all right with both of you. I think Isabella would have wanted to be there too, and this is the closest I can get to making that happen." "Of course," Celeste said immediately. "I'd be honored." As he walked to the door, Theodore paused and looked back at the piano one more time. "Keep playing," he said softly. "Even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when the whole world feels like it's falling apart. Keep playing. That's what Isabella would tell you if she were here." And then he was gone, disappearing back into the storm like some kind of guardian angel, leaving behind only a business card and the promise that everything was about to change. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? After Theodore left, Celeste and I sat at our kitchen table until sunrise, staring at his business card and trying to convince ourselves that what had just happened was real. We talked about everything and nothing, apologizing for our fight, crying together, and slowly beginning to believe that our impossible dream might actually come true. At exactly 9 a.m., I called the number Theodore had written on the back of his card. His assistant, a kind woman named Patricia, told me that Mr. Whitman had been in his office since 6 a.m., working with his legal team to set up the scholarship fund. By noon, the Isabella Whitman Memorial Scholarship was officially established, and by 4 p.m. the first payment had been wired to Juilliard's admissions office. 36 hours before the deadline, Celeste's enrollment was confirmed. I kept waiting for someone to tell us it was a mistake, that Theodore had changed his mind, that billionaires don't really do things like this for random families they meet in thunderstorms. But 2 weeks later, when we received the official scholarship documents in the mail, I finally started to believe it was real. The first semester, September 15th, 2023. Move-in day at Juilliard. Theodore had offered to hire a moving company to help us, but we decided to make the drive from Seattle to New York ourselves. It felt important to make that journey together, just Celeste and me, carrying everything we owned in the back of a rented truck. When we pulled up to the residence hall on West 65th Street, Theodore was waiting for us. He'd flown in from Seattle that morning, he said, because he wanted to see Celeste settled in properly. He looked different than he had that storm night. Rested, purposeful, like helping us had given him something to live for again. He helped us carry boxes up to Celeste's dorm room, a tiny space she was sharing with a violinist from Georgia named Hannah. As we unpacked her clothes and set up the small keyboard Theodore had bought her for practice, I watched my daughter transform from a scared teenager into someone who belonged in this world of serious musicians and classical music excellence. "Are you nervous?" Theodore asked Celeste as we finished arranging her room. "Terrified," she admitted, "but excited too. For the first time in my life, I get to be around other people who understand why music matters so much." Theodore smiled, and I saw Isabella in that smile. "She would have been so proud to meet you," he said quietly. October 30th. Celeste's first public performance as part of her scholarship requirements. The audience was small, just other first-year students and faculty, but for someone with Celeste's stage fright, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. Theodore and I sat in the third row of the small recital hall, both of us holding our breath as Celeste walked onto the stage. She'd chosen to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the same piece she'd been playing during the storm, and as her fingers touched the keys, I saw her nerves disappear. She didn't just play the piece, she told a story with it. The story of a girl who almost gave up her dreams, a mother who almost sold her soul to save them, and a stranger whose grief became their salvation. When she finished, There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and the applause went on for nearly 5 minutes. After the recital, Theodore approached Celeste with tears in his eyes. "That's exactly what Isabella would have sounded like if she'd made it to Juilliard," he said. "Thank you for letting me hear her play again." Over the next 2 years, Theodore became like a father to Celeste and a close friend to me. He attended every one of her recitals, sent care packages during finals week, and spent hours on the phone with her when she was struggling with difficult pieces or homesickness. During Christmas break of her sophomore year, Celeste started teaching piano to children at a community center in South Seattle that Theodore had helped fund. Watching her work with those kids, seeing how naturally she connected with them and helped them find their own musical voices, I knew that Isabella's dream of music for everyone was becoming reality. "She's a natural teacher," Theodore told me as we watched Celeste help a 7-year-old named Marcus learn to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Isabella would have been just like this with kids. Patient, encouraging, able to make the difficult stuff seem simple. By her junior year, Celeste's stage fright had almost completely disappeared. She'd learned that performing wasn't about being perfect for strangers, it was about sharing something beautiful with people who needed to hear it. She started volunteering at hospitals and nursing homes, bringing music to patients who couldn't get out to hear it themselves. One afternoon, she called me from a pediatric cancer ward where she'd been playing for children receiving treatment. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I finally understand what Grandma May meant when she said music was the language of the soul. It's not about the notes or the technique or even the applause. It's about connection. It's about reminding people that beauty still exists in the world, even when everything else feels broken." That's when I knew that Theodore's investment in her hadn't just saved her career. It had helped her discover her purpose. March 15th, 2025, Celeste's junior recital at Juilliard. This wasn't just another student performance. Word had gotten out about the Isabella Whitman Memorial Scholarship recipient who had overcome crippling stage fright to become one of the program's most promising students. The recital hall was packed with music industry professionals, reporters, and fellow students. Theodore sat in the front row, wearing a small pin with Isabella's picture on his lapel. As Celeste took the stage, radiant in a simple black dress, he whispered something under his breath that I couldn't quite hear. Later, he told me he'd been talking to Isabella, telling her that she would have loved Celeste's performance. Celeste's program that night included pieces by Chopin, Rachmaninoff, Debussy, and a contemporary composition written specifically for her by one of her professors. But the piece that brought the house down was her final selection, a traditional Chinese lullaby called Mo Li Hua, the same song she'd played during the storm 3 years earlier. As she played, I closed my eyes and heard my mother's voice humming, along from somewhere beyond memory. I thought about that terrible night when we'd fought about money and dreams and what we deserved to hope for. I thought about Theodore driving through the storm, planning to end his life, being saved by the sound of my daughter's broken heart pouring through piano keys. The standing ovation lasted 8 minutes. When it finally died down, Celeste spoke into the microphone. 3 years ago, I almost gave up music forever because I thought dreams like mine weren't meant for people like me. Tonight I want to dedicate this performance to 3 people. First, to my grandmother Mei Chen, who taught me that music is bigger than fear. Second, to Isabella Whitman, whose memory makes it possible for kids like me to be standing on stages like this. And third, to my mom, who taught me that love sometimes means fighting for things that seem impossible. As I'm telling you this story, Celeste is preparing for her senior recital at Juilliard. She's been accepted to graduate school with a full fellowship, and she's already been invited to audition with 3 major symphony orchestras. The Isabella Whitman Memorial Foundation has grown to support over 200 young musicians across the country, and Celeste serves on the selection committee, helping identify the next generation of talented kids who need a chance. Theodore visits us at least once a month. He's learned to cook traditional Chinese dishes because he says it makes him feel closer to the family that saved his life. We celebrate Isabella's birthday together every year by attending concerts and supporting young musicians. His grief will never completely go away, but he's found a way to transform it into something that creates joy for others. Last month, Celeste told me she's been composing a piece inspired by that storm night. She wants to premiere it at Carnegie Hall next year, with proceeds benefiting music education programs in underserved communities. She's calling it Song in the Storm, and she's dedicating it to all the broken people who find each other in the dark and choose to heal together. What I learned from that terrible, beautiful night is that miracles don't always come dressed as miracles. Sometimes they come as thunderstorms that make you face the truth about your life. Sometimes they come as strangers who knock on your door when you least expect them. Sometimes they come as your own daughter's tears falling on piano keys while she plays the most heartbreaking music you've ever heard. The real miracle wasn't Theodore's money, though that certainly changed our lives. The real miracle was the connection between three people who were all broken in different ways and found a way to help each other heal. Celeste learned that vulnerability can be a strength. I learned that accepting help doesn't make you weak. And Theodore learned that losing someone you love doesn't mean their dreams have to die with them. If you're watching this and you're facing something that feels impossible, if you're fighting for a dream that seems too big for your circumstances, if you're wondering whether hope is just another word for foolishness, I want you to remember Celeste's story. I want you to remember that sometimes the worst storms in your life are just clearing the way for something beautiful to take root. Keep fighting for your dreams, even when you can't see how they'll come true. Keep believing in the power of your own gifts, even when the world tells you they're not valuable enough. Keep playing your music, whatever that music might be, because you never know who might need to hear it in the middle of their own storm. And if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that miracles are still possible in this world, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people whose lives were changed by extraordinary moments of connection and grace. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their dreams matter, that their gifts are valuable, and that sometimes angels really do come disguised as strangers in thunderstorms. Because 3 years ago, my daughter was crying at a piano, in the dark, ready to give up everything she'd ever worked for. Today, she's preparing to graduate from Juilliard and spend her life bringing music to people who need it most. That's the power of refusing to give up, the power of accepting help when it's offered, and the power of believing that your story isn't over yet, even when everything around you suggests it might be. Thank you for listening to our story. Thank you for believing that music, love, and hope are still the most powerful forces in the universe. And thank you for being part of a community that celebrates the moments when broken people choose to heal each other instead of staying broken alone.